In a small, quiet town surrounded by lush green hills and thick forests, life moved at a slow, predictable pace. The townsfolk were simple people who cherished their routines and traditions. They woke up early, worked hard during the day, and gathered in the evenings to share stories over cups of tea or warm meals. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other's names, and secrets rarely stayed hidden for long. But one fateful morning, everything changed when an extraordinary discovery turned this peaceful town upside down. It all started on the outskirts of the town, where construction workers had been hired to renovate an old estate. The property had once belonged to a wealthy family but had fallen into disrepair over the years. As the workers dug deeper into the ground to lay new foundations, they stumbled upon something unusual, a large, heavy object buried beneath layers of earth. At first they thought it might be a piece of ancient machinery or perhaps a forgotten storage chest, but as they brushed away the dirt, they realized it was far more intriguing than that. It was a coffin. The coffin was unlike anything anyone in the town had ever seen before. Its surface was intricately carved with detailed patterns and symbols that seemed to tell a story. Some of the designs looked like vines twisting around the edges, while others resembled stars and moons arranged in mysterious constellations. Despite its age, the coffin appeared remarkably well preserved, as if it had been carefully sealed to withstand the test of time. What truly caught everyone's attention, however, was the inscription etched into the lid. In bold, elegant lettering it read, "Do not open until justice is served." Word of the discovery spread quickly through the town. By mid-morning, a crowd had gathered near the excavation site, eager to catch a glimpse of the mysterious artifact. People whispered among themselves, speculating about what could possibly lie inside. Some believed it contained treasure left behind by an eccentric nobleman, while others thought it might hold relics from a forgotten era. A few superstitious individuals warned that opening the coffin would unleash a curse, citing tales of similar discoveries that ended in disaster. Yet despite the rumors and fears, there was an undeniable curiosity driving everyone to want answers. When news of the coffin reached Judge Eleanor Hart, she wasted no time in taking action. Known throughout the region for her sharp mind and unwavering commitment to fairness, Judge Hart was not someone who shied away from challenges. She had spent decades ensuring that justice prevailed in her courtroom, earning both respect and admiration from those who knew her. When she heard about the inscription on the coffin, she felt compelled to investigate further. To her, the phrase, "Justice is served," wasn't just a warning, it was a call to action. Judge Hart arrived at the site later that afternoon, accompanied by a small team of officials. Her presence immediately commanded attention, and the murmurs of the crowd quieted as she approached the coffin. Standing tall and composed, she examined the artifact closely, running her fingers gently over the carvings. Then, turning to address the gathering, she spoke in a voice that carried authority yet warmth. "This coffin has been buried here for reasons we do not yet understand," she said, "but I believe it holds something important, something that may have waited centuries to come to light. We cannot ignore it." Her words resonated deeply with many in the audience. While some remained skeptical, others nodded in agreement, trusting Judge Hart's judgment. Still, there were protests from a handful of townsfolk who urged caution. One elderly man stepped forward, leaning heavily on his cane. "Your Honor," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "this is no ordinary find. My grandfather used to tell me stories about strange happenings in these parts, about graves that shouldn't be disturbed and spirits that guard ancient secrets. Are you sure we should meddle with forces we don't understand?" Judge Hart listened patiently, acknowledging the man's concerns, but she also reminded him and everyone else that justice required courage. "Fear can paralyze us," she replied firmly, "but it can also drive us to seek the truth. Whatever lies within this coffin, it was placed here with purpose. And until we uncover that purpose, we cannot claim to have done our duty." With that, she gave the order to transport the coffin to the courthouse, where it could be examined under controlled conditions. Workers carefully loaded it onto a cart, wrapping it in protective cloth to prevent damage. As the procession made its way back to town, a mix of excitement and apprehension filled the air. Children ran alongside the cart, pointing and laughing, while adults exchanged nervous glances. Even the animals seemed restless, with dogs barking incessantly and birds taking flight from nearby trees. By evening, the coffin had been placed in the center of the courthouse, drawing even more curious onlookers. Torches illuminated the room, casting flickering shadows on the walls. The atmosphere was electric, charged with anticipation. Judge Hart stood beside the coffin, flanked by experts she had summoned to assist with the investigation. There was Dr. Margaret Lane, a historian specializing in ancient artifacts, Professor Arthur Klein, an archaeologist known for his work on burial sites, and Father Thomas O'Reilly, a local priest who offered spiritual guidance. Each brought unique skills to the table, and together they prepared to unlock the secrets of the mysterious coffin. Before proceeding, Judge Hart addressed the growing crowd one last time. "We are here tonight not out of morbid curiosity," she said, "but because we owe it to ourselves and to those who came before us to uncover the truth. This coffin may hold answers to questions we didn't even know we had. Let us approach this task with respect and humility." Her speech earned nods of approval from some and murmurs of doubt from others, but no one could deny the gravity of the moment. As the final preparations were made, the tension in the room became almost palpably. Tools were laid out, cameras positioned, and notebooks opened. Everyone braced themselves for what was about to happen. With a deep breath, Judge Hart signaled for the experts to begin. Slowly, carefully, they inserted crowbars into the seams of the coffin and applied pressure. The sound of wood creaking echoed through the silent chamber, sending shivers down spines. And then, with a loud crack, the lid finally gave way. For a brief moment, no one moved. All eyes were fixed on the now open coffin, waiting to see what lay inside. The suspense was unbearable, stretching seconds into what felt like hours. Finally, Dr. Lane leaned forward, her flashlight illuminating the interior. What she saw made her gasp audibly, prompting others to crowd around for a better look. Inside the coffin was not a body or jewels, as some had speculated, but stacks of yellowed papers tied neatly with brittle string. The documents looked fragile, as though they might crumble at the slightest touch. Yet, there was something undeniably significant about them, judging by the reverence with which they had been stored. And so the journey into the unknown began, not with a bang, but with a whisper of history waiting to be told. The courtroom was abuzz with energy as word spread that the mysterious coffin had been opened. People from all corners of the town poured in, eager to catch a glimpse of what lay inside. The room, usually reserved for trials and legal proceedings, now felt more like a theater hosting the most anticipated performance of the year. Rows of wooden benches creaked under the weight of the crowd, while latecomers stood pressed against the walls, craning their necks to see better. Children perched on their parents' shoulders, wide-eyed with curiosity, while elders whispered prayers or muttered warnings about disturbing things best left alone. At the center of it all stood Judge Eleanor Hart, calm and composed despite the chaos swirling around her. She had insisted on conducting the examination of the coffin's contents in full view of the public, believing transparency was key to maintaining trust. "This is not just my responsibility," she had said earlier. "It belongs to all of us." Her decision had sparked heated debates among the townsfolk. Some praised her boldness while others accused her of recklessness. But regardless of opinion, everyone agreed on one thing: they couldn't look away. As the experts gathered around the coffin, cameras clicked and flashes illuminated the dimly lit room. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks, capturing every detail for the morning papers. Dr. Margaret Lane, the historian, gingerly picked up the first bundle of documents, her gloved hands moving with practiced care. She held them close to the light, examining the worn edges and faded ink. "These are incredibly old," she murmured almost to herself, "possibly dating back several centuries." Professor Arthur Klein, the archaeologist, leaned in for a closer look. "If I'm not mistaken," he added, his voice tinged with excitement, "this handwriting style matches that of the late 1700s. Whoever wrote these must have gone to great lengths to preserve them. Father Thomas O'Reilly crossed himself quietly, his expression solemn. May God guide us as we uncover whatever truths lie within, he said softly. Judge Hart called for silence, raising her hand to quiet the murmurs rippling through the crowd. Let's proceed methodically, she instructed. We don't know yet what we're dealing with, so patience is essential. With that, Dr. Lane untied the brittle string binding the first stack of papers and carefully unfolded the top document. It was a letter, its text written in elegant cursive script that danced across the page. As she began reading aloud, the room fell utterly still. The letter described a series of events involving prominent families in the town's early history. Names like Grayson, Pembroke, and Ashford appeared repeatedly, names that were still familiar to many in the present day. According to the writer, these families had engaged in corrupt practices, exploiting the less fortunate to consolidate wealth and power. They manipulated land deals, falsified records, and even orchestrated the disappearance of those who dared oppose them. The tone of the letter was accusatory, filled with outrage and sorrow. This can't be true, someone in the crowd muttered, breaking the stunned silence. Others nodded in agreement, visibly shaken. One man, whose face had turned pale, whispered to his neighbor, "My great-grandfather was mentioned here. He was supposed to be a hero." Another woman clutched her chest, tears welling in her eyes. "I always wondered why our family never spoke about the past," she said. "Now I understand." Dr. Lane continued reading, her voice steady despite the mounting tension. The next document revealed an even darker chapter. It detailed how Thomas Grayson, a wealthy landowner and patriarch of one of the town's founding families, had orchestrated a scheme to seize control of valuable property. To cover his tracks, he allegedly ordered the arson of a rival's home, resulting in the deaths of an entire family. The writer claimed to have witnessed the crime, but feared retaliation if he came forward. Instead, he documented everything, meticulously, hoping future generations would bring justice where he could not. The revelations hit the crowd like a thunderclap. Gasps echoed through the room, followed by murmurs of disbelief and anger. For decades, the Graysons had been celebrated as pillars of the community, their names synonymous with generosity and leadership. Now, evidence suggested they had built their legacy on lies and bloodshed. A young woman sitting near the front buried her face in her hands, visibly distraught. When asked later, she confessed she was a direct descendant of Thomas Grayson. "I feel sick," she admitted. "How could I not have known?" As more documents were examined, the scope of the corruption became clearer. It wasn't limited to the Graysons. Other influential families were implicated as well. Contracts, ledgers, and personal correspondence painted a picture of systemic greed and abuse of power. One particularly damning entry included a list of bribes paid to local officials to ensure silence. Another revealed how stolen goods were smuggled out of town under the guise of legitimate trade. Each new discovery sent shockwaves through the audience, forcing them to confront uncomfortable truths about their ancestors and themselves. Amid the growing unease, tensions began to rise. Members of the implicated families tried to defend their lineage, insisting the documents were fabrications or exaggerations. "This is slander," shouted a middle-aged man with flushed cheeks. "You're dragging our names through the mud, based on hearsay." His outburst triggered a wave of arguments, with some siding with him and others demanding accountability. Judge Hart intervened before the situation escalated further. "Enough," she commanded, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "We are here to seek the truth, not to assign blame prematurely. These documents may be difficult to accept, but they deserve our attention. If we ignore them, we dishonor the victims and perpetuate the cycle of injustice." Her words struck a chord, silencing the dissenters, for now. Despite the drama unfolding inside the courthouse, strange occurrences outside added another layer of unease. Over the past few days, residents reported unusual phenomena that seemed connected to the Coffin's discovery. Lights flickered unpredictably in homes near the excavation site, even when there was no wind to knock down power lines. Farmers complained of livestock behaving erratically, refusing to enter certain fields or barns. At night, faint whispers could be heard drifting through the streets, though no source could be identified. Some swore they saw shadowy figures lurking at the edge of the forest, watching silently before vanishing into thin air. Local superstitions resurfaced with a vengeance. Older townsfolk recalled tales of restless spirits tied to unresolved grievances. "They say the dead won't rest until their wrongs are made right," an elderly woman told a group of listeners huddled outside the courthouse. Maybe that's why these ghosts are stirring now. Younger people dismissed such talk as nonsense, attributing the incidents to coincidence or overactive imaginations. Yet deep down, even the skeptics couldn't shake the feeling that something unnatural was at play. Back inside, the investigation pressed on. By evening, fatigue was setting in, but the sense of urgency remained. Judge Hart encouraged the experts to take breaks, ensuring they stayed sharp. Meanwhile, volunteers distributed food and water to the crowd, which showed no signs of dispersing. Many had brought blankets and pillows, determined to stay overnight if necessary. Conversations buzzed in hushed tones, ranging from theories about the documents to speculation about the supernatural events. One particularly intriguing theory emerged from a local historian named Clara Whitman. She pointed out that the inscription, on the coffin, "Do not open until justice is served," could be interpreted as a condition rather than a warning. Perhaps the coffin was meant to remain sealed until the town was ready to face its past, she suggested. And maybe the strange happenings are signs that we've reached that point. Her words resonated with many, offering a glimmer of hope amidst the turmoil. As dawn approached, the experts reached the final document in the coffin. Unlike the others, it was signed and dated, bearing the unmistakable signature of Thomas Grayson himself. In it, he confessed to his crimes, expressing remorse for the lives he had ruined. "I write this not to seek forgiveness," he concluded, "but to bear witness to my sins. May this grave serve as penance and may justice prevail when it is unearthed." The chilling final sentence sent chills down everyone's spines. Only when justice prevails will this grave bring peace. The room fell silent once more, the weight of Grayson's words settling heavily on everyone present. Judge Hart closed, her eyes briefly absorbing the magnitude of what they had uncovered. Then, opening them again, she addressed the weary but captivated crowd. "This is only the beginning," she said firmly. "The truth has been laid bare, and now it falls to us to act. Let us honor the dead and the living by doing what is right." With those parting words, the session adjourned, leaving the townsfolk to grapple with the implications of what they had learned. Outside, the first rays of sunlight broke through the horizon, casting long shadows across the land. Whether it marked the start of a new chapter or the continuation of an old curse remained to be seen. The next morning, the town woke up to a palpable shift in the air. News of Thomas Grayson's confession had spread like wildfire, and conversations buzzed everywhere, in shops, schools, and even church pews. People who had once prided themselves on their family histories now found themselves questioning everything they thought they knew. The weight of the revelations hung over the community like a storm cloud, heavy and oppressive. For some, it was anger that burned brightest. For others, it was shame or fear. But one thing was certain: life in the town would never be the same again. Judge Eleanor Hart wasted no time in addressing the situation head-on. She called an emergency meeting at the courthouse, inviting representatives from each implicated family as well as members of the general public. The room quickly filled with a mix of emotions: defensiveness, guilt, curiosity, and even defiance. Some attendees sat stiffly, arms crossed, refusing to make eye contact, while others leaned forward anxiously, eager to hear what the judge had to say. Judge Hart stood at the front of the room, her presence commanding yet compassionate. "This is not about placing blame," she began, her voice steady and clear. "It's about understanding our past so we can build a better future. These documents reveal actions that have shaped this town for generations, often in ways none of us realized. If we ignore them, we risk repeating the same mistakes, but if we confront them honestly, we have a chance to heal." Her words struck a chord with many. though not everyone was ready to listen. A tall man with sharp features rose abruptly from his seat. His name was Richard Grayson, a prominent businessman and descendant of Thomas Grayson. His face flushed, red with indignation as he addressed the crowd. "You're asking us to accept accusations based on centuries-old papers," he exclaimed. "How do we even know these aren't forgeries? Someone could have planted them to tarnish our reputations." His outburst drew murmurs of agreement from a few others seated nearby, but it also sparked rebuttals. Clara Whitman, the historian who had proposed the theory about the coffin's inscription, stood up calmly. "Forgery is unlikely," she countered. "The materials, ink, and handwriting all align with the period described. More importantly, why would anyone go to such lengths to fabricate evidence against your ancestors when there's nothing to gain?" Richard hesitated, clearly unsettled by her logic but unwilling to back down. "Even if they're real, that doesn't mean we should dredge up the past," he shot back. "We've built good lives here. Why destroy everything because of something that happened hundreds of years ago?" Before the argument could escalate further, Judge Hart intervened. "Mr. Grayson raises a valid concern," she acknowledged. "No one here wants to see innocent people harmed. However, ignoring the truth won't erase it. Justice isn't just about punishing wrongdoing, it's about accountability, reconciliation, and making amends where possible." Her measured response seemed to calm the room slightly, though tensions remained high. Over the next hour, the discussion shifted toward practical steps. How could the town address the injustices outlined in the documents? Should descendants of the implicated families bear responsibility for their ancestors' actions? And what role should the victims' descendants play in seeking resolution? One elderly woman named Martha Pembroke, whose family name had appeared repeatedly in the records, offered a surprising perspective. Her frail hands trembled as she clutched the edge of the podium, but her voice rang strong. "I grew up hearing stories about my ancestors' wealth and influence," she said, "but I always wondered how they managed to rise so quickly during those times. Now I know the cost of their success, and it sickens me." Pausing to wipe away tears, she continued, "If my family benefited from crimes committed against others, then it's only right that we acknowledge it. Maybe we can find a way to give back to honor those who suffered." Her heartfelt admission silenced the room. Slowly, other voices joined in, sharing similar sentiments. A young man named Daniel Ashford, whose great-great-grandfather had been implicated in smuggling schemes, suggested using family resources to fund scholarships for underprivileged students. Another woman proposed creating a museum dedicated to preserving the town's true history, ensuring that future generations wouldn't forget the lessons of the past. As the meeting drew to a close, Judge Hart announced her decision to organize a formal inquiry into the allegations. It wouldn't be a traditional trial since the accused were long dead, but rather a symbolic effort to examine the evidence and determine how best to move forward. She invited volunteers to help research the documents further, verify their authenticity, and identify living descendants of both the perpetrators and the victims. To ensure fairness, she appointed a panel of independent experts, including Dr. Margaret Lane, Professor Arthur Klein, and Father Thomas O'Reilly, to oversee the process. Over the following weeks, the town transformed into a hive of activity. Teams of researchers combed through archives, cross-referencing the newly discovered documents with existing records. Local historians interviewed elders who might hold oral traditions passed down through generations. Meanwhile, news of the investigation attracted attention beyond the town's borders. Journalists arrived from neighboring cities, eager to document the unfolding drama. Documentaries were filmed, articles written, and debates held on national television. What had started as a local mystery had become a nationwide sensation. Yet, despite the flurry of external interest, the focus remained firmly on the townsfolk themselves. Many struggled with conflicting emotions as they delved deeper into their shared history. For example, Sarah Grayson, a soft-spoken librarian and distant relative of Thomas Grayson, found herself wrestling with feelings of betrayal and sorrow. "I used to feel proud of my last name," she confided to a friend one evening. "Now I feel like it's tainted. Every time I introduce myself, I wonder if people are judging me for something I didn't do." Her struggles mirrored those of countless others caught in the ripple effects of the investigation. Yet, amidst the turmoil, moments of grace began to emerge. One day, a group of teenagers organized a cleanup effort at the old cemetery, where many of the victims' graves lay neglected. Armed with gloves and gardening tools, they worked tirelessly to restore dignity to forgotten souls. Their act inspired others to join in, turning the project into a community-wide initiative. Flowers bloomed where weeds had once taken root, and faded tombstones gleamed anew under the sun. Meanwhile, the strange occurrences that had plagued the town since the coffin's discovery showed no signs of abating. Lights still flickered unpredictably, and eerie whispers lingered in the night. Some interpreted these phenomena as signs of unrest among the spirits tied to the uncovered crimes. Others dismissed them as coincidences exacerbated by heightened nerves. Regardless of belief, the events kept the townsfolk on edge, fueling speculation that the investigation was far from over. One particularly unsettling incident occurred late one evening at the courthouse itself. A janitor tasked with locking up reported hearing footsteps echoing down the empty hallways, though he was alone. When he investigated, he claimed to see shadowy figures standing near the display case housing the coffin. Startled, he dropped his keys, and when he looked up again, the figures were gone. The story spread rapidly, adding another layer of intrigue and fear to the unfolding saga. Despite the unease, progress continued. By piecing together fragments of information, researchers identified several direct descendants of the victims, mentioned in the documents. Among them was an elderly man named Harold Miller, whose ancestors had lost their land due to fraudulent dealings orchestrated by Thomas Grayson. When contacted, Harold expressed shock, but also gratitude. "For years, my family whispered about being wronged," he said, "but we never had proof. Now, thanks to this investigation, we finally do." Harold's involvement marked a turning point in the proceedings. He agreed to participate in the symbolic trial Judge Hart had envisioned, representing his ancestors, alongside other descendants of the victims. Similarly, members of the implicated families stepped forward to acknowledge their roles, albeit reluctantly. Tensions ran high as preparations for the trial intensified, but there was also a growing sense of purpose, a collective determination to confront the past and forge a path toward healing. As the date of the trial approached, the town braced itself for what promised to be a historic event. Flyers advertising the proceedings appeared on bulletin boards, lampposts, and storefront windows. Schools scheduled field trips so students could witness firsthand the culmination of months of hard work. Even skeptics who had initially dismissed the investigation found themselves drawn in by the sheer magnitude of what was at stake. On the eve of the trial, Judge Hart gathered the panel of experts for a final briefing. Sitting around a large oak table illuminated by candlelight, they reviewed the evidence one last time. Documents were organized into neat stacks, timelines double-checked, and testimonies rehearsed. Despite the late hour, no one seemed eager to leave. They understood the significance of what they were about to undertake, not just for the town, but for humanity itself. "It's rare that we get a chance like this," Judge Hart reflected, aloud, breaking the silence. "A chance to rewrite history, not by erasing it, but by learning from it. Let's make sure we do." The day of the symbolic trial arrived, and the town buzzed with a mix of anticipation and trepidation. The courthouse, usually a quiet and formal space reserved for legal matters, had been transformed into something resembling a theater. Rows of wooden benches were packed with townsfolk, journalists, historians, and curious visitors from neighboring areas. Every seat was taken, and those who couldn't find a spot stood along the walls or spilled out onto the steps outside. The air was thick with tension, punctuated by occasional whispers and the rustling of papers. It wasn't just a trial, it was a reckoning. At the center of the room sat Judge Eleanor Hart, her expression calm but resolute. To her left were representatives of the victims' descendants, their faces etched with determination. On her right were members of the implicated families, some visibly uneasy, others defiant. Between them lay the documents uncovered from the coffin, now carefully arranged on a long table like pieces of a puzzle waiting to be solved. Above it all hung the inscription that had started this journey: "Do not open until justice is served." Those words seemed to loom over everyone, a silent reminder of why they had gathered here today. Judge Hart began the proceedings with a brief statement, her voice steady and clear. "This is not a conventional trial," she explained. "It is an opportunity for us to confront the truths of our past, acknowledge the harm done, and work toward healing. Today, we will hear testimonies, examine evidence, and reflect on how we can move forward together." Her tone carried both authority and compassion, setting the stage for what promised to be an emotional and transformative experience. The first to speak was Harold Miller, the elderly man whose ancestors had lost their land due to fraudulent dealings, orchestrated by Thomas Grayson. Supported by a cane, he shuffled slowly to the podium, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted the microphone. For a moment, he simply looked out at the crowd, his eyes scanning the sea of faces before him. Then, taking a deep breath, he began to share his family's story. "My great-grandparents worked tirelessly to build a life for themselves," Harold said, his voice quivering with emotion. "They farmed the land, raised children, and dreamed of leaving behind something meaningful. But their dreams were stolen, not through hard times or bad luck, but through lies and manipulation. They were forced off their property, left with nothing but broken promises and shattered hopes. Growing up, I heard fragments of this story, always whispered in hushed tones. We didn't have proof back then, only suspicions. Now, thanks to these documents, we finally know the truth." His words resonated deeply with the audience, many of whom nodded in understanding. Some wiped away tears, moved by the raw honesty of his account. When he finished speaking, a respectful silence filled the room, broken only by the soft sound of applause. It wasn't applause for victory or triumph. It was applause for courage, for standing up and giving voice to those who could no longer speak for themselves. Next came Sarah Grayson, the librarian and distant relative of Thomas Grayson. She approached the podium hesitantly, clutching a piece of paper in her hand. Unlike Harold, she didn't exude confidence. Instead, she radiated vulnerability. Her voice wavered as she began to read from her prepared statement. "I grew up believing my family name represented honor and integrity," she admitted. "But learning about the actions of my ancestor has shaken me to my core. I don't know how to reconcile the person I am with the legacy I carry. All I can do is apologize for what it's worth, and promise to use whatever privilege I have to make things right." Her apology drew mixed reactions. Some in the audience nodded approvingly, recognizing the sincerity in her words. Others remained skeptical, whispering among themselves about whether apologies could ever truly undo centuries of wrongdoing. Still, Sarah's willingness to step forward marked a turning point. It signaled that accountability wasn't just about pointing fingers. It was also about owning one's place in history, however uncomfortable that might be. As the day wore on, more testimonies followed, each adding layers to the complex tapestry of the town's past. A young woman named Emily Pembroke recounted how her family's wealth had been built on exploitative labor practices, while a middle-aged man named James Ashford described discovering his ancestors' role in smuggling operations. Each speaker brought a unique perspective, yet all shared a common thread: the desire to understand, to acknowledge, and ultimately, to heal. Interspersed between the personal accounts were presentations from the panel of experts overseeing the full investigation. Dr. Margaret Lane provided historical context, explaining how the economic and social structures of the time enabled such widespread corruption. Professor Arthur Klein highlighted archaeological findings that corroborated the documents, including traces of burnt foundations believed to belong to homes destroyed during Thomas Grayson's schemes. Father Thomas O'Reilly offered spiritual reflections, urging the community to view the process as a form of collective redemption rather than punishment. Despite the progress being made, not everyone welcomed the trial with open arms. Outside the courthouse, protests erupted, led by individuals who felt the entire endeavor was misguided. Richard Grayson, still fuming from earlier confrontations, stood at the forefront of the dissenters. Holding a megaphone, he addressed the growing crowd. "You're tearing apart families over ancient history," he shouted. "None of us alive today committed these so-called crimes. Why should we pay the price?" His argument struck a chord with some, particularly younger residents who feared the investigation would tarnish their reputations without cause. Tensions escalated when a group of teenagers clashed with protesters, accusing them of trying to sweep the truth under the rug. Voices rose, tempers flared, and for a brief moment it seemed like chaos might erupt. Police officers intervened, forming a human barrier to separate the two sides, but the underlying conflict remained unresolved. Inside the courthouse, the mood shifted as Judge Hart called for a recess. Stepping down from her bench, she walked among the attendees, listening to their concerns and offering words of encouragement. She reminded everyone that the purpose of the trial wasn't to assign guilt or shame, but to create a space for dialogue and growth. "We are stronger together," she said firmly. "Let's focus on finding solutions, not fueling division." When the session resumed, the atmosphere had softened slightly. Testimonies continued, but this time there was a noticeable effort to bridge divides. One particularly poignant moment occurred when Clara Whitman, the historian, proposed a symbolic gesture, planting a tree in memory of the victims using soil collected from sites linked to their suffering. The idea was met with overwhelming support, uniting even the most divided factions. Representatives from both sides agreed to participate, signaling a tentative step toward reconciliation. As evening fell and the trial drew to a close, Judge Hart delivered her closing remarks. Standing tall, she addressed the weary but hopeful crowd. "Today, we took a monumental step toward justice," she declared. "Not perfect justice, perhaps, but meaningful progress nonetheless. By facing our past, we have opened the door to a brighter future. Let us carry this spirit forward, not just today, but every day." Her words lingered in the air as people filed out of the courthouse, their faces reflecting a mixture of exhaustion and relief. Outside, the protests had died down, replaced by quieter conversations and thoughtful glances. The strange occurrences that had haunted the town since the Coffin's discovery seemed to ease as well, though no one dared say it aloud. Whether it was coincidence or something deeper, the sense of unease that had gripped the community began to lift, replaced by a fragile but palpable hope. The days following the symbolic trial marked a turning point for the town, though the journey toward healing was far from over. The weight of the revelations still lingered in the air, but there was an undeniable shift, a cautious optimism that hadn't existed before. People began to talk more openly about what they had learned, sharing their thoughts and feelings with neighbors, friends, and even strangers. Conversations that once sparked anger or defensiveness now carried tones of curiosity and understanding. It was as if the trial had cracked open a door that had long been locked, allowing fresh air and fresh perspectives to flow through. One of the most significant developments came when Clara Whitman's proposal to plant a memorial tree gained momentum. What started as a simple idea quickly evolved into a community-wide initiative. Volunteers poured in from all corners of the town, eager to contribute in any way they could. Some offered to dig the hole for the tree, while others donated supplies, like soil, mulch, and tools. A local artist designed a plaque to accompany the tree, inscribed with the names of the victims whose stories had been brought to light. The inscription read, "In memory of those who suffered unseen, may your voices be heard at last." The planting ceremony took place on a crisp autumn morning, under a sky painted with streaks of gold and orange. Hundreds of people gathered at the chosen site, a small park nestled between rolling hills where wildflowers swayed gently in the breeze. Among them were descendants of both the victims and the perpetrators, standing side by side in a rare display of unity. Judge Eleanor Hart presided over the event, her presence lending gravitas to the occasion. Before the first shovel hit the ground, she addressed the crowd. "This tree is more than just a symbol," she said, her voice carrying across the open space. "It represents growth in our understanding of the past, growth in our relationships with one another, and growth in our commitment to justice. Its roots will run deep, anchoring us to the truth while its branches reach toward a brighter future. Her words resonated deeply, drawing nods and murmurs of agreement from the audience. Then, with a collective effort, everyone worked together to plant the sapling. Hands of all ages and backgrounds dug into the earth, mixing soils collected from sites linked to the victim's suffering. When the last handful of dirt was patted down, the crowd erupted into applause, not loud or boisterous, but heartfelt and sincere. For many, it felt like a tangible step toward closure, yet not everyone embraced the newfound sense of reconciliation. Resistance persisted, particularly among members of the implicated families who struggled to come to terms with their ancestors' actions. Richard Grayson remained vocal in his opposition, using every opportunity to criticize the investigation. He argued that focusing on the past only served to divide the community further, insisting that progress required looking forward, not backward. His stance garnered support from a small but vocal group, leading to heated debates in town meetings and online forums. Despite this resistance, cracks began to form even within Richard's own family. One evening, during a private gathering at the Grayson estate, tensions boiled over. Sarah Grayson, the librarian who had earlier apologized publicly, confronted her cousin directly. "How can you keep denying what's right in front of us?" she demanded, her usually soft voice rising with emotion. "These documents don't lie. Our ancestors did terrible things, and pretending otherwise won't change that. At some point, we have to take responsibility." Richard bristled at her, challenge, his face reddening with frustration. "Responsibility? For something none of us had anything to do with? That's absurd," he shot back. But his arguments lacked conviction, undercut by the growing number of relatives who sided with Sarah. Even his own daughter, Emily, expressed doubts about his stance, quietly questioning whether clinging to denial was truly worth the cost. The internal conflict within the Grayson family mirrored similar struggles happening across the town. Families grappled with how to reconcile pride in their heritage with the harsh realities uncovered by the investigation. Parents found themselves explaining difficult truths to their children, unsure of how much, or how little, to share. Classrooms, teachers incorporated lessons about the town's history into their curriculum, encouraging students to think critically about legacy, accountability, and justice. Amid these personal reckonings, efforts to honor the victims continued to gain traction. Inspired by the success of the Memorial Tree Project, several initiatives emerged to ensure the uncovered stories wouldn't fade into obscurity. A group of volunteers launched a campaign to restore neglected grave sites, cleaning headstones and planting flowers around forgotten plots. Others worked to digitize the documents found in the coffin, creating an online archive accessible to anyone interested in learning about the town's complex history. Perhaps the most ambitious undertaking was the creation of a museum dedicated to preserving the full scope of the town's narrative. Funded largely by donations from descendants of the implicated families, the museum aimed to present an unflinching look at both the triumphs and tragedies that had shaped the community. Exhibits included replicas of the coffin and its contents, interactive displays detailing key events and personal artifacts loaned by residents. The centerpiece of the museum was a mural painted by local artists depicting scenes of resilience and hope emerging from darkness. As construction of the museum progressed, so too did attempts to address lingering supernatural phenomena. While many dismissed the flickering lights, eerie whispers, and shadowy figures as mere coincidence or overactive imaginations, others believed the disturbances were tied to unresolved grievances from the past. To explore this possibility, Father Thomas O'Reilly organized a series of interfaith ceremonies aimed at bringing peace to restless spirits. Held in locations associated with the crimes detailed in the documents, the ceremonies drew participants from diverse religious backgrounds, united in their desire to heal old wounds. One such ceremony took place near the excavation site where the coffin had been discovered. Underneath a canopy of stars, townsfolk gathered around a makeshift altar adorned with candles, flowers, and handwritten prayers. As Father O'Reilly led the group in song and reflection, a profound stillness settled over the area. Whether it was divine intervention or psychological relief didn't matter. What mattered was the shared sense of catharsis experienced by everyone present. Back in the courthouse, the panel of experts finalized their report on the investigation. After months of research, analysis, and deliberation, they concluded that the documents were authentic and provided irrefutable evidence of systemic corruption spanning generations. Their findings recommended several measures to promote accountability and prevent similar injustices in the future, including stricter oversight of local governance, educational programs focused on ethics and transparency, and ongoing dialogue between descendants of the victims and perpetrators. Judge Hart reviewed the report late one night, seated alone in her chambers. Her eyes scanned the pages slowly, absorbing each recommendation with careful consideration. Though the weight of leadership often rested heavily on her shoulders, she couldn't help but feel a glimmer of pride. Against all odds, the town had risen to meet the challenge posed by the mysterious Coffin. They hadn't shied away from the truth. Instead, they had embraced it, using it as a catalyst for change. When she finally closed the file, she allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. Outside her window, the newly planted tree stood tall against the night sky, its silhouette framed by moonlight. She thought about the countless hours of work, the tears shed, the arguments waged, and the bridges built. Most importantly, she thought about the resilience of the human spirit, the ability to confront pain, acknowledge mistakes, and strive for something better. The next morning, Judge Hart convened a final meeting with the panel and key stakeholders to discuss implementation of the recommendations. The room buzzed with energy as plans were outlined and responsibilities assigned. There was no shortage of volunteers eager to contribute, proof that the town's transformation was genuine and enduring. As the meeting wrapped up, Judge Hart offered closing remarks. "We've accomplished so much already," she said, smiling warmly. "But let's remember that true justice isn't a destination, it's a journey. Let's continue walking this path together, supporting one another along the way." With those words, the formal investigation officially concluded. Yet the ripple effects of the trial continued to spread, touching lives in ways large and small. Friendships formed across divides, businesses adopted ethical practices inspired by the lessons learned, and young people grew up knowing their town's history, not as a source of shame, but as a foundation for growth. For the first time in years, the town felt whole again. Not perfect, but whole. And as winter gave way to spring, the memorial tree began to bud, its tiny leaves reaching toward the sun, a living testament to the power of truth, forgiveness, and renewal. The months that followed the symbolic trial and the planting of the memorial tree brought about a profound transformation in the town. What had once been a community divided by secrets, fear, and mistrust was slowly becoming something stronger, a place where people chose to confront their past rather than hide from it. The changes weren't immediate or perfect, but they were real, driven by small acts of courage and compassion that added up over time. One of the most noticeable shifts occurred during the annual Harvest Festival, an event that had always been a cornerstone of the town's calendar. In previous years, the festival had been a lighthearted celebration of autumn, filled with pumpkin carving contests, hay rides, and homemade apple pies. This year, however, the festivities took on a deeper meaning. Organizers decided to incorporate elements honoring the town's history, including a display featuring replicas of the documents found in the coffin, photographs of restored grave sites, and stories shared by descendants of both victims and perpetrators. At the heart of the festival was the memorial tree, now thriving under the care of volunteers who watered and tended to it regularly. Its branches swayed gently in the crisp October breeze, adorned with colorful ribbons tied by visitors as symbols of remembrance and hope. Children played tag around its base, laughing and shouting, while adults paused nearby to read the plaque and reflect quietly. For many, the tree served as a reminder that even painful truths could give rise to beauty if faced with honesty and determination. The museum dedicated to the town's history also opened its doors just in time for the festival. Located in a renovated building near the courthouse, it quickly became a hub of activity. Visitors wandered through exhibits that told the full story of the town, its triumphs, tragedies, and everything in between. Interactive displays allowed them to explore maps showing how land ownership had shifted over centuries, listen to recorded testimonies from the trial, and examine artifacts donated by local families. One particularly popular exhibit featured a replica of the coffin itself, complete with information about its discovery and significance. For Clara Whitman, the historian, who had first suggested interpreting the coffin's inscription as a condition rather than a warning, the museum represented the culmination of months of hard work. Standing in the main hall on opening day, she watched as families moved from one display to another, their faces lighting up with curiosity and understanding. "This is what history should be," she said softly to Judge Eleanor Hart, who stood beside her. "Not just dates and names, but stories that connect us, to each other, to our ancestors, and to the lessons we need to learn." Judge Hart nodded, in agreement, her eyes scanning the room. She noticed Sarah Grayson guiding a group of children through an exhibit about accountability, her voice gentle yet firm. Nearby, Harold Miller chatted animatedly with a young couple, explaining how his family's story had inspired him to become more involved in preserving the town's heritage. Even Richard Grayson, though still skeptical, had shown up briefly, lingering near the entrance before slipping away unnoticed. Change, she realized, didn't happen overnight, but it did happen. Outside the museum, life in the town continued to evolve. The strange occurrences that had unsettled residents since the coffin's discovery seemed to fade entirely, as if whatever restless spirits had lingered had finally found peace. Lights no longer flickered without explanation, whispers ceased echoing through the streets at night, and shadowy figures vanished from the edges of the forest. Whether this was coincidence or evidence of resolution remained a topic of debate, but most people preferred to focus on the tangible improvements taking root in their daily lives. One such improvement came in the form of new community programs aimed at fostering connection and healing. A monthly storytelling circle gave residents a platform to share personal experiences related to the investigation, creating a safe space for vulnerability and empathy. Workshops on conflict resolution and ethical leadership attracted participants of all ages, equipping them with tools to navigate challenges constructively. Even schools got involved, organizing essay contests and art projects centered around themes of justice, forgiveness, and legacy. Among the most impactful initiatives was a scholarship fund established by members of the implicated families, named after Thomas Grayson, not to honor him but to acknowledge the harm he had caused. The fund provided financial assistance to students from marginalized backgrounds. It was a gesture of restitution, however imperfect, and one that resonated deeply with recipients. "It feels like a way to turn something bad into something good," said Maria Alvarez, a high school senior whose family had long struggled to make ends meet. "I never thought I'd see anything positive come out of all this, but here we are." As winter approached, bringing colder temperatures and shorter days, the town prepared for another milestone, the unveiling of a permanent memorial wall near the courthouse. Designed by a team of local artists and historians, the wall featured etched portraits of individuals mentioned in the documents, along with brief descriptions of their roles in the town's history. Victims were highlighted prominently, their images framed by intricate carvings of vines and stars reminiscent of those on the coffin. Perpetrators were included as well, not to glorify them, but to ensure their actions would never be forgotten. The day of the unveiling, the entire town turned out to witness the ceremony. Bundled in coats and scarves, they gathered in front of the courthouse, their breath visible in the frosty air. Judge Hart delivered a speech that captured the essence of their journey thus far. "This wall stands as a testament to our commitment to truth and accountability," she said, her voice steady despite the chill. "It reminds us that justice isn't just about punishment. It's about remembering, learning, and growing. Let it inspire us to keep building a future worthy of those who came before us." When the cover was lifted, revealing the wall in all its solemn beauty. A hush fell over the crowd. Eyes welled with tears as people traced their fingers over the etchings, connecting with the faces and stories immortalized in stone. Some whispered prayers, others simply stood in silence, absorbing the weight of what had been accomplished and what still lay ahead. In the weeks and months that followed, the memorial wall became a gathering place for reflection and conversation. Families visited together, using the opportunity to teach younger generations about the importance of integrity and responsibility. Tourists passing through the area stopped to admire it, often leaving notes of encouragement or gratitude pinned to a nearby bulletin board. It wasn't just a monument. It was a living part of the town's identity. For Judge Eleanor Hart, watching these developments unfold filled her with a quiet sense of pride. Though she had played a central role in guiding the community through its darkest hour, she knew the credit belonged to everyone who had dared to face the truth. As she strolled through the park one evening, admiring the memorial tree bathed in golden twilight, she reflected on the lessons learned along the way. Justice, she realized, wasn't a single act. It was a process, ongoing and ever-evolving. And sometimes the hardest truths led to the brightest outcomes. By spring, the town had settled into a rhythm that felt both familiar and new. The scars of the past hadn't disappeared. They never would, but they had begun to heal. Conversations that once carried tension now flowed freely, grounded in mutual respect and understanding. Friendships formed across old divides. Businesses thrived thanks to renewed trust, and young people grew up knowing their town's history as a source of strength rather than shame. And so, the mysterious coffin that had once sparked fear and division ultimately became a symbol of redemption. Its discovery had forced the town to confront uncomfortable truths, but it had also given them the chance to rewrite their story, not by erasing the past, but by embracing it fully. Through accountability, forgiveness, and collective effort, they had transformed pain into progress, proving that even the darkest chapters could lead to brighter futures. As the sun set behind the hills, casting long shadows across the land, the memorial tree stood tall against the horizon, its leaves rustling softly in the breeze. Somewhere deep within the earth, roots intertwined with remnants of the past, anchoring the present firmly to the ground. Above, branches stretched skyward, reaching toward a future shaped by hope, resilience, and the enduring power of truth.